Okay, we'll introduce our speaker, Bill Smith. Many of you know him. I bet you everyone knows Bill. And I will forego any adulations
No, you don't.
and such. Okay. Let's welcome you. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you. Thank you for being gracious. My dear wife was going to be here today. And she got up, dressed, ate breakfast, and about 7:30 said, "I'm so dizzy as a loon, I don't know if I can even walk." But she's better now. I checked with her just a few minutes ago, but she wanted to be here. I'm going to sit here because they're on Zoom and they want me to be in one place. So we'll keep this very informal. 3 years ago when we had the
Hey, Bill, this is Don Neely. Can you ask Bruce to unshare so that we can see you in full photo?
Oh, okay.
Thank you. Great.
This is technology. Ready to go?
Okay, that's the full screen.
I'm sure glad he's here doing the technology.
You, me too, Bill.
Okay. 3 years ago, when we had the triennial here, had a chance to visit for a few minutes with our presiding bishop, Michael Curry. And, you know, just a year or two before that, he had gave the sermon. Bishop of Canterbury asked him to give the sermon at Megan and Harry's wedding in St. George's Chapel in London. Maybe you saw that or not. Just last week, Bishop Curry was on the service for Colin Powell, who was a person I had known in the military a little bit and certainly admired a lot. And he was at Washington Cathedral, and it was a really beautiful service. We have an outstanding presiding bishop. You know, he got the brotherhood when he was here at the triennial. He spoke to the officers. Bruce, you remember that? And he said, rather than just have a general mission, y'all need to focus on specific areas. So you'll notice that we have 7 areas now that we youth, for example, and racial justice and veterans. And I can't remember them all, Bruce, but you notice Don Neely has been really good at putting together talks and things about these. That's because of our presiding bishop. He has really transformed this church. And today I wanted to share, the more I read this book and shared it with Don, he said, "Would you be willing to give a talk?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. Let me see if I can do it." So I began to go through chapter by chapter, really isolating what I think are the key things that tell you who this man is. And the theme is love is the way. And I don't want to read this stuff too much, but I want to highlight some things about this. It says this book is sort of biographical. It starts with early in his life, what things shaped him to feel the way he did. His mother was a mathematician, brilliant mathematician, but she had a bleeding brain and was very sick for a long time and died. His mother brought his dad to the Episcopal Church. They went to a service that she took him to, and he saw that even blacks and whites could take out of the same chalice. And he said, any church that is that open to everybody, I want to be a part of. So he later became a minister himself, his father. The mother died, a grandmother who was very religious. Really, he said he had a safe harbor as a child, a place to always go and feel that he was in the presence of God. And that meant a lot. And so this book is really a journey into the holy and hidden heart of Bishop Curry's life, the people and experiences that led to his conviction that the way of love can change each and all of us for the better. The community that raised him was in the way of Jesus is the only way to freedom. Jesus is the way to truth and life. You know, the early church was called the way, and Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. In fact, it's only when we get on the right way that we find the truth and hopefully find life here more abundantly, but also eternal life. He says the revival we need in this country, our church is in deep trouble. The world is in deep trouble. And the only thing that's going to save it is love, genuine love. The revival of love is the guide for living, for relationships, for leaders, for individual and collective spiritual, material, and physical well-being. In other words, everything about us is about love. In fact, if you want to analyze people psychologically, you look at their early life and what did they love? Who did they love? Did they even experience love? There are kids who grow up not experiencing love. Love has many faces. It can be outward, physical, sensual. It can be family and friendships and relationships. And it can be service and self-sacrifice, agape love, that Jesus exhibited in going to the cross on behalf of all of us. The opposite of love, he says, is internal selfishness, to put down, harm, or limit others. True love lifts and builds up, helps and heals, sets free and liberates. Love is the basis for mortal, moral, and spiritual grounding. Love is action. Love is not just a nice thought or a passing feeling. Real love is action, a force and follow through. That's where I fail in my love. I mean well, I try to do some things, and then I say, oh, I've done that part. I don't need to do any more. And that's exactly when I really need to be making sure that what I'm doing is making a difference. Love endures and never ends, according to Paul in Corinthians. God is the source of all love. In fact, God had such vast love, he says, that he had no choice but to create the universe. People are the vessels of God's love. Every time we see God's love in action, it's because of somebody, some person. And even Jesus knew to rest in God's love. Love is a gift of self to others. Love directs our faith or trust, he calls faith and trust, to our hope if we are to live abundant with love and charity for all. How can I find love? It says where true love is, God is. God is there. You have to go out and act to give and receive love. And being a part of a community of people who actively want to do that. Our church group, this group, the Brotherhood, to liberate themselves from the tyranny of self, to look outward in small gestures and large sacrifices. Every day is an opportunity to do love with others in community. And he says, love does not end. Sometimes it doesn't erase grief, but in death, life is changed, not ended. Nothing, of course, can separate us from the love of God. Then the next question, by the way, these questions are kind of the chapters in his book. And what I've tried to do is pick out the essence of what he meant by that question, and then one concrete example. And I've put together these sheets because I want y'all to have something to reflect on and think about and add to as you wish. And let's start a discussion about this. This is not the final thing. This is a beginning dialogue, hopefully. How do I keep loving when the world is not? How do you turn problems of reality into possibilities, loving possibilities? He says there are three things can help you do that: tradition, time-tested wisdom of ancestors, even your spiritual lineage or heritage. In other words, your past, your imagination, see and reform things in a new light. He said Moses talked to God and imagined a world without slavery and went on to create it. And the third dimension is God. God is not to be taken for granted. When God is factored into the equation and the outcome, everything changes. He said his grandmother never had any anger that he knew of at life, at the landowner, in spite of hardship, sickness, death, injustice, oppression, violence, and abuse. Night riders with crosses in their front yard. She could do all things through Christ who strengthened her. We are not slaves to sin, but children of God, of a God who loves us. Can love really change the world? He says changing the world often begins with the dream of loving people and doing what is needed. Bishop Curry heard Archbishop Tutu of South Africa speak in the mid-'80s when Nelson Mandela was still in prison. Tutu said God had a dream for South Africa to end apartheid. In 1963, Martin Luther King led a march in Washington with a dream for America. They would rise up and live out the creed that all men are created equal and women created equal. Dolly Parton had a dream to help poor children learn to read and improve their lives. They now think over 2 million children have benefited from what Dolly Parton taught with her literacy, her gifts of kindness, acts, so on. Vera Dozer, some of you, Seth probably knows Vera Dozer. She's a lay theologian, Episcopalian, wrote a book called The Dream of God to show how God loves everybody. John Lewis, the politician, said, roots of love are nurtured by a river of faith. Love to change things, change negatives into positives. What is our dream and vision here at St. Matthew's? How will we change the world to be better in Northwest Hills and beyond? Next thing he raises is, does loving everybody make me a doormat? You go around being vulnerable, opening yourself up to people, and people will take advantage of you. The challenge is to create a life that allows you to fulfill the needs of others while still loving yourself. Your deepest gladness, he says, should meet where the world's greatest hunger exists. Practicing loving others strengthens our inward love of God. If you're not sure how you ought to love God more deeply, practice doing things for others. We all share love, living in the image of God and living in the example of Jesus. Does love have an impact? You know, as individuals, we sometimes think we only see things from a very, very limited vision. We're not sure even what to bring up or what to change or what to suggest. He says, just do your job where you are and let God do his job. Faith is taking your best step forward and then leaving the rest to God. He gave an example of a church he went to in a poor area, Black area, in his career. By the grace of God and several priests and nuns, it had a school with some nuns, the church and school wanted to change their whole community. So they formed a team of people to work together. They spent months getting to know the people and getting people to talk to each other. 3 churches shared stories, identified common concerns, and translated those into agenda items and eventually a strategy and action. They decided to build a partnership and focus on a particular area, early childhood education. They created a network of caregivers and providers that help reduce systemic racism and entrenched poverty with some enduring impact. Even today, when he goes back to that community that he knew as a young priest, he says he sees the town there is different. Who is my neighbor to love? My neighbor to love is more than the people who live around me, my work and community. There are no boundaries unless we create them. No limits. When he was at St. James in Baltimore, he decided that he needed to bring together and help with an institute for Islamic, Christian, and Jewish studies to bring together peoples of all 3 religions to study Genesis, a part of the Bible that we all share as Abrahamic faith. Groups were set up around Baltimore to bring people from mosques, synagogues, and churches together. This was new to many. He said, Eva, a Holocaust victim, survivor, shared her story. People listened, and you could see the boundaries disappearing. He says, I realized that day that I can be a moral person and still be immoral in how I see society, class, race, and even religion. We have to break down the boundaries. Martin Buber's book, I and Thou, we can look at the world through things being things, or we can look at it as people, relationships. And he says, everything that matters in life is really about relationships. He quotes Presiding Bishop Browning's talk in 1985. Episcopal Church was ahead of its time for some churches. He formally announced, this church is ours, open to all. There are no outcasts. It says, what if love reveals me to be a hypocrite? Sometimes we know things, we want to love everybody. We want to reach out to everybody. And yet, sometimes things around us prevent us from doing that. He said he was elected bishop in 2000. The Episcopal Church was facing major challenges and threats. Homosexuality was dividing the church. How could he honor all people equally and support the ban on same-sex unions? In the 1970s, General Convention noted, homosexual persons are children of God who have a full and equal claim with all other persons upon the love, acceptance, and pastoral concern and care of the church. In 1994, the canon for ordination of priests ruled out discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation. But in most dioceses, gay and lesbian individuals openly in a relationship were ineligible to be ordained. Everyone knew there were gay priests, but were forced to hide their sexuality. After much prayer and Bible study, Bishop Curry said, decided that the way of love had to be centered on people, individual people, more than any principle. He had to accept love over being a hypocrite. How do I even love my enemy? A reporter asked him, what's the biggest challenge facing the church? And he answered, we're wrestling with sexuality now, but the greater challenge is how to make e pluribus unum, out of many one, real without obliterating anybody. How do we walk together with diverse and even opposing groups and people with different values and hopes? In 2015, the marriage canon changed to be gender neutral. He says, we're showing love and being a church that recognizes and welcomes the beautiful and diverse tapestry of mankind. Unfortunately, the Anglican Communion, with 85 million people around the world, does not agree on these issues the same way. Can love unite everybody? Everyone. How can love overcome what divides us and move us forward together? He quotes Abraham Lincoln, quoting the words of Jesus. He was right in saying, a house divided against itself cannot stand. In many places in the world, not just the United States, love for one's country is degenerating into calls to exclude and evict our neighbors. Racism today is dangerous and real for millions of people. The United States is a highly divided country. But God is not finished with us. Whatever the future holds, we'll live together as family or perish as fools. Love has not left this land. Many among us are ready to move forward and witness love and community at every level in this country. Let us share our stories. He says stories bring people together and break down boundaries. He said Gandhi's nonviolent action includes speaking the truth in ways that convert and unite hearts. Does love mean that we have to avoid politics? Jim Wallace, the co-founder of Sojourners, wrote God's Politics. By the way, that's a book I'd recommend to y'all if you're concerned about political problems in this country. He shares concern for the soul of Christianity in America. In Christianity, as in national politics, the voices of extremists are drowning out the silent majority. They defend a panoply of dark isms, racism, nationalism, nativism, sexism. They are promoting them to the point of crisis in the church. Our institutions are groaning under misuse and outright abuse. There are cruel attacks and innuendo from both sides. How can we Christians productively engage with our democracy? So the laws of the land reflect shared human values and compassion, mercy and care for people and the planet. We have to listen to and honor all viewpoints. If we try to bring love into political discourse, many people will think we're speaking like aliens. When the way of love becomes our way of love, it's a game changer. It shapes every decision we make. The path to love needs to build relationships and trust instead of trying to win points, bring out issues. And here's what I think, 1, 2, 3, 4, and the other person says theirs. And so they get further divided. Love's way requires standing up in public for the core values you believe are under attack. How can love heal America? Pray to become witnesses to the power of love to lift us to the mountaintop where humans can dance with God's dream. The Celts called mountaintops, thin places where heaven and earth seem to touch. Think of Moses, the Sermon of the Mount, and Martin Luther King's language of the mountaintop and promised land. When God, who is love, becomes our spiritual center of gravity and our moral compass, we live differently, regardless of what the world around us does. The world changes for the better, one life at a time. You can't convert everybody all at once. Don't ever give up on love. Listen to it, trust it, give into it, and obey it. Love can heal and liberate when nothing else will. And the other book that kind of goes with this book is called The Way of Love. And I know we don't have much time here. The Way of Love by Scott Gunn. Scott Gunn is the guy that puts out the forward movement, you know, the day-to-day devotional thing that we have in our rack in church. As you go into church, there's the forward day by day. Scott Gunn has some things, and I've got a handout for y'all on that too. And I'll just take a minute to cover a little bit of that because it ties in with it. It had a foreword by Michael Curry. So at the time he's writing this book, he's also helping Scott Gunn with this other book. It says, and I love this, Jesus, and I've got a copy of this for y'all if you want it. Jesus founded the most revolutionary movement in human history, a movement built on unconditional love of God for the world and the mandate to live that love. Bishop Curry recalled together a group of Episcopalians gathered in Atlanta to help him think about how to encourage all of us as the church to be the modern iteration of the Jesus movement. The deep roots of Judaism and Christianity offer rich, time-tested spiritual practices and disciplines, ways of prayer, meditation, study, hospitality, and witness. For centuries, these practices have helped to draw those who engage them into a loving, liberating, and life-giving relationship with God, with others, and with God's world. What would happen if we asked every Episcopalian to adopt these practices for a Jesus-centered life? And I think at our annual meeting coming up, we're going to do that. How would God, through us, change lives and the world? He came up with 7 words that summarize all of these Christian Jewish principles. Turn. The first practice is you have to be willing to turn your life around to reach out to something. Learn. Thomas Kramer said in 1549 Book of Common Prayer, "Blessed Lord, who caused all holy scriptures to be written for our learning, grant us to hear them, read, mark, learn, and inwardly digest them, that we may embrace and ever hold fast the blessed hope of everlasting life." The next one was prayer. And God asked us, the one thing people asked that Jesus really spent time on was prayer. He didn't tell us how to organize the church. He didn't tell us how to live by yourself or anything, but they did ask, Lord, teach us to pray. And I like the way Gunn explains the Lord's Prayer. I want to, in this handout I'll give you, it'll be there for you. The Lord's Prayer. To pray, the Lord's Prayer is this: to pray with reverence for God's holiness, hopeful for the coming of God's kingdom of mercy and justice. He tells them to surrender to God's will and not their own, with confidence that they will be given to sustain them. He teaches us to ask for our own forgiveness so that we might forgive others. and to ask for deliverance from struggles and from Satan. In this way, prayer transforms us and the whole world. The next one is worship. And he says, it doesn't matter whether you're a small group or you're in a little town or in a little church or you're in a grand cathedral. We worship in many different forms and styles, many places and cultures. Worshiping with simple or ornate liturgy, formal or informal ways, is not as important as internal, sincere, heartfelt love, gratitude, and commitment to God we experience in our worship. Our heartfelt love, gratitude, and commitment to God. We can worship God anywhere, at any time. In fact, spontaneous worship can be the most powerful and rewarding. Blessing. How do we bless people? You know, loving people, taking time to listen to people, sharing love, and helping someone who's lonely or struggling. And then he says, go, and he talks about Matthew 28, how to go out and make disciples. And it centers around, first you have to love the people you want to reach. And the last one is rest. Jesus knew the power of the Sabbath. In our complicated world where we experience stress, distress, weariness, confusion, conflict, some people like to stay busy so they don't have to deal with their internal personal reality. We all need time to reflect and renew who we are and where we need to go. Sometimes dreams, I love this part of it. Sometimes dreams at night or at rest are released to make us think about things we may unconsciously be avoiding during our busy day. Even God rested on the seventh day of creation. Rest on the Sabbath by reflecting on what God is doing in your life and what you need to be doing. So I've got copies of this for y'all to give you also. And I hope if you have questions, I know we're probably out of time, but if you have questions, please, any quick question, comment, or?
One thing that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. And I'm replacing love, thinking that love is the way.
Love is the way.
That it includes everybody on the, that doesn't know Jesus.
No boundaries.
No boundaries. Alan, any other comments, questions, real quick?
Yeah, I'd like to ask a question.
Yes.
Bill is a very thoughtful experience in fitness. And I know this is a difficult question, but if you're a young person and you're going into the military, how do you resolve this contradiction that appears that you have to, let's just say, attack it? How do you get that kind of service from a young person under these conditions?
Well, you're trained at basic training to go out and be tough and how to shoot and take away all your emotions. But there are some groups in the military, even for basic trainees, that are religious groups, in addition to chaplains. There's some national movements where young people really are seeking God in bigger numbers, younger troops, and it's a volunteer army. They come because they want to come. They love the country. And I have found that many of these young people have very high standards. They also are leaving bad situations at home, especially women are leaving bad situations at home, is why they go in the military. And they're looking for some security, assurance, some chance to advance in life because they can't afford to go to college or whatever. I'm optimistic about our country. I see a generation of young people who are really into the climate change movement, the making the military better, getting rid of some of the things in the military that we do. Like at Fort Hood right now, they're undergoing a major review of their harassment policies. They were absolutely terrible. And it's happening all over the military. It's not just up there. So
Great.
I don't know if that answered the question, but
Thank you, everyone. And, Alan, would like to lead us in the closing service?